The wax seal cracked under Nathaniel Ashford's thumb, splitting the red disc that had bound the partnership contract for exactly one turn of the seasons. And across the farmhouse table, Brenna Whitlock watched him with eyes the color of moss after rain, her small tusks catching the lamplight as she pressed her lips together and waited for him to speak first. He had written the thing himself a year ago, sitting at this same scarred oak table with autumn wind rattling the shutters and desperation making his handwriting loop wild across the parchment. Half share of the farm. Equal say in planting and harvest. Living quarters separate. Business arrangement only, renewable by mutual agreement each autumn. She had read it 3 times, her green finger tracing each line, before she signed her name in careful block letters and handed him 2 silver coins as her buy-in, which was all she owned in the world after walking away from the warband that had no more use for an orc woman who would not raid human settlements. "Well," Nathaniel said now, and his voice came out rougher than he intended. "That is that." Brenna nodded once. She sat perfectly still in her chair, her broad hands folded on the table, her leather work vest laced tight over a linen shirt that had been his wife's once, before the fever took Sarah 3 winters past. Brenna had worn it every day since he offered it, mended it twice, and never once mentioned the woman who owned it first. That was her way. She did not pry, did not push, simply worked from dawn until the stars came out and asked for nothing more than her fair half and a roof that did not leak. The farmhouse felt too quiet. Outside, the fields lay golden under the harvest moon, wheat bundled and waiting for the wagon, apple trees heavy with fruit that would need picking before the first frost. A good year. The best since Sarah died, if he was honest, and he was trying very hard not to think about why. "So we renew," Brenna said finally. Not a question. She reached for the blank parchment he had set beside the lamp, ready for a fresh contract. Nathaniel let the broken seal fall from his fingers. It bounced twice on the table, then lay still. "Or we renegotiate." Her hand stopped halfway to the parchment. For just a moment something flickered across her face, too quick to name, and then the careful blankness returned. "You want a larger share?" "No." He laughed, which seemed to startle her more than anything else he might have said. "God, no. Brenna, you have worked harder than any 3 men I ever hired. The farm would have gone under without you, and we both know it." "Then I do not understand." He did not understand it either, or maybe he understood it too well and had been lying to himself for months. Spring planting, when she had shown him how to coax the rocky north field into yielding barley by mixing in wood ash and turning the soil 3 times instead of 2. Summer repairs, when they had spent 4 days reshingling the barn roof, and she had caught him when he slipped on the wet thatch, her strong arm around his chest, both of them breathing hard and not entirely from the work. Autumn now, the season turning, and he could not sign another business contract and pretend this was only about crop shares and profit margins. "I want to change the terms," he said. Brenna withdrew her hand from the parchment and placed it back in her lap. Her face had gone very still. "I see." "Do you?" He leaned forward, elbows on the table, and tried to find words for something he had never been good at naming. Sarah had been the one with the pretty speeches. He just made jokes and hoped for the best. "Because I have been trying to figure out how to say this for 3 months now, and I keep circling around it like a fool." "Say it plainly, then." Her voice had taken on that flat quality it got when she was bracing for a blow. "If you want me to leave, just tell me. I will be gone by morning." "Leave?" Brenna, for the love of, he stopped, blew out a breath, started again. "I do not want you to leave, I want you to stay, permanently." The silence stretched between them, broken only by the pop and hiss of the fire in the hearth. Somewhere in the barn, one of the horses whickered softly. Nathaniel made himself hold her gaze, those strange green eyes with their flecks of gold, and watched her try to puzzle out what he meant. "Another contract, then," she said slowly. "For multiple years. I can agree to that. Not a contract." His heart was hammering now, and he felt like a boy again, asking Martha Crenshaw to dance at the harvest fair and being turned down flat. Except this mattered more than a dance ever had. A marriage. Brenna went absolutely motionless. Even her breathing seemed to stop. When she spoke again, her voice came out barely above a whisper. "That is not possible." "Why not?" "Because," she gestured at herself, at the green skin and the tusks and the pointed ears, at everything that marked her as other. "Because I am what I am, and you are what you are, and people do not, we do not, I am asking. You are being kind." She stood abruptly, her chair scraping back. "You are a kind man, Nathaniel. You have been kind to me when no one else would be, but you do not have to do this. I will renew the contract. I will work for wages if that suits better, but do not offer me this out of pity." He stood too, came around the table before she could retreat. "Look at me." When she finally dragged her eyes to his, he saw something in them that made his chest ache, something raw and frightened and desperately hopeful all at once. "This is not pity. This is not kindness. This is me trying to tell you that somewhere between teaching me about crop rotation and fixing the plow for the 5th time because I am apparently cursed with tools. I fell in love with you, and I would very much like to make this arrangement permanent in the most binding way I know how." The words hung in the air between them, clumsy and too honest and entirely true. Brenna opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "You cannot possibly." "I can. I do. I have for months, probably longer, and I have been carrying it around like a stone in my pocket, trying to figure out if you felt even a fraction of the same thing. But you are so good at that blank face you do that I could not tell. And then I thought maybe the contract renewal would force the issue, and clearly I am no good at this, but there it is." He was babbling now, words tumbling over each other. "I love you, and if you do not feel the same, we will shake hands and sign the contract and never speak of it again, but I had to tell you. I could not let another year go by without at least trying." For a long moment, she just stared at him. Then very carefully she said, "You love me." "Yes, me, Brenna. The orc woman who showed up on your doorstep with nothing but 2 silver coins and calluses on her hands. That would be the one. And you want to marry me. I believe that is what I have been trying to say, yes." Something that might have been the beginning of a smile tugged at the corner of her mouth, there and gone too quick to catch. "You are aware that the neighbors will talk. The neighbors already talk. Old Henderson thinks I am a fool for hiring you in the first place. His opinion of me can hardly get worse. The church may not allow it. Then we find a priest who will, or we say the words ourselves and call it done. Brenna, I am not asking you to make this easy for me. I am asking you to say yes or no, so I can either start planning a wedding or drown my sorrows in bad ale." She looked down at her hands, those strong green hands that had mended fences and delivered calves, and held him steady when grief threatened to pull him under in those first hard months after she arrived. When she looked back up, her eyes were bright with something that might have been tears, except he had never seen her cry. "I would like to say yes," she said quietly, "but I need you to understand what you are asking for. I am not human. I will never be human. People will shun you. They will call you names. They will make your life harder than it needs to be, and all because you chose me. I know. I cannot give you the kind of family you had before. I do not know if orc women and human men can even have children together. No one has ever told me about such things. Then we will have a family of 2, or we will adopt, or we will figure it out as we go." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took one of her hands in both of his. Her skin was warm, the calluses rough against his palms. "Brenna, I am not asking for easy, I am asking for you." She turned her hand in his grip, threaded her fingers through his, held on. "You are a very strange man, Nathaniel Ashford. I have been told that before. And you are certain, truly certain, because if I say yes, I will not let you take it back. I will hold you to it." "Good," he said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. "I hope you do." She searched his face for a long moment, looking for doubt or hesitation or some sign that he would wake up tomorrow and regret this. He let her look, kept his gaze steady, and willed her to see the truth of it. Finally, she nodded just once, and the smile that spread across her face was like watching the sun rise. "Then yes," Brenna said. "Yes, I will marry you, I will be your wife if you will have me, and I will probably make you regret it at least twice a week." "Only twice, you are being generous." She laughed, and the sound of it filled the farmhouse with warmth, chased away the last of the autumn chill. Before he could think better of it, before he could second-guess or plan or do anything sensible at all, Nathaniel leaned in and kissed her. It was meant to be quick, chaste, the sort of kiss that sealed a promise without demanding more. But the moment his lips met hers, something shifted, fell into place with the solid rightness of a key turning in a lock. She made a small sound against his mouth, surprise or relief or maybe both at once, and then her free hand came up to cup his face, and the kiss deepened into something that felt like coming home after a long time away. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Brenna's eyes had gone very wide. "Oh," she said softly. "Yes," Nathaniel agreed. "Oh." They stood there in the lamplight, hands clasped, foreheads nearly touching, and let the weight of it settle over them. A year ago, this had been a business arrangement. Now it was something else entirely, something that made his heart race and his palms sweat, and every reasonable thought flee his head like birds startled from a tree. "We should probably write new terms," Brenna said eventually, though she made no move to step away. "For the marriage, I mean. Division of property, rights and responsibilities, that sort of thing. Ever the practical one. One of us has to be. You would probably just shake hands and call it settled." "I have been known to do that, yes." She squeezed his hand, then finally released it and moved back to the table. The old contract still lay there, broken seal beside it, and she picked it up and fed it to the fire without ceremony. The parchment curled and blackened, the carefully written terms turning to ash, and Nathaniel felt a curious sense of relief watching it burn. "No more contracts," he said. "We can divide everything down the middle and trust each other to be fair. Is that acceptable?" Brenna glanced at him over her shoulder, the firelight painting her skin copper and gold. "You would do that. Trust me with half of everything you own. I already do. Have for a year now. This just makes it official." She turned back to the fire, and he saw her shoulders rise and fall with a deep breath. When she spoke again, her voice had gone rough with emotion. "I never thought I would have this. A home. A partner who sees me as an equal. A future that does not involve running or fighting or just trying to survive one more day." She paused, then added quietly, "Someone who loves me." Nathaniel crossed to her, wrapped his arms around her from behind, and felt her lean back into him with a trust that humbled him. "You have all of it now, for as long as you want it. I want it forever. Then forever it is." They stood like that for a long time, watching the fire burn down to embers, and Nathaniel thought about the strange paths that led people to each other. Sarah would have liked Brenna, he thought. Would have appreciated her dry humor and her competence, and the way she never backed down from hard work. Would have told him he was a fool for waiting so long to speak up. The guilt he had carried for months, the sense that loving someone new meant betraying Sarah's memory, eased just a little. Sarah had loved him enough to want him happy, He could honor that by choosing happiness now. "We should probably tell people," Brenna said eventually. "Before they hear it as gossip and turn it into something ugly. We should, though I make no promises about how well that goes." "Do you think anyone will come to the wedding?" He thought about their neighbors, the mix of frontier farmers and cautious settlers who had fled the chaos of the southern territories for this quiet valley. Some would be horrified. Some would refuse to acknowledge it. But there were a handful who might surprise them. Some will. Enough. And if they do not, then we say our vows to each other in the fields and the sky, and it will be enough. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head, breathed in the scent of her hair, soap and straw and wood smoke. "I do not need witnesses to make this real. Just you." She turned in his arms, reached up to touch his face with careful fingers, traced the line of his jaw like she was memorizing it. "I have loved you since the first week I was here," she said quietly. "When you made that terrible joke about the chickens refusing to lay eggs because they found my face frightening, and then you spent an hour explaining to them that I was part of the farm now, and they needed to accept it. You talked to chickens on my behalf. I did not stand a chance after that." Nathaniel felt heat climb into his cheeks. "You heard that. I hear many things. You are not as quiet as you think. Well, in my defense, those chickens were being very rude." She laughed again, and he decided he would spend the rest of his life trying to make her laugh like that, open and bright and entirely unguarded. They kissed again, slower this time, learning the shape and taste of each other, and when they finally parted, Brenna's cheeks had darkened to a deeper green. "I should probably move my things to the house," she said. "If we are to be married, it seems silly to keep living in the barn loft." "You have been sleeping in the barn loft for a year, and you never said anything. It was in the contract, separate living quarters. I assumed you wanted privacy." "Brenna, the barn loft is freezing in winter. Why did you not tell me?" She shrugged. A gesture he was learning meant she was uncomfortable. "It was better than most places I have slept, and I did not want to presume." "No more presuming. You get the second bedroom, or we share the first, or we build you your own cottage if that is what you want. But no more sleeping in the barn like some stray I took pity on." "Agreed, agreed." She hesitated, then added, "The first bedroom would be acceptable, if you are comfortable with that." "I am very comfortable with that." They spent the rest of the evening making quiet plans, talking through logistics and practicalities, and all the small details that came with binding two lives together. Who would handle which chores, though that had mostly sorted itself already? How to manage the money, though they both agreed the farm income should be equally split. When to hold the wedding, and Nathaniel suggested the harvest festival in 3 weeks, which would give them time to finish bringing in the crops and would mean half the valley would already be gathered for celebration. "You want to make it a public spectacle?" Brenna asked doubtfully. "I want to make it clear that I am not ashamed, that this is not something we are hiding in the shadows. You deserve better than a secret wedding that no one speaks of." She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, the harvest festival. But if anyone throws anything at me, I reserve the right to throw it back harder." "That seems fair." They fell into an easy silence after that, comfortable in a way that only came from months of working side by side, learning each other's rhythms and habits. Nathaniel banked the fire while Brenna cleared the table, and they moved through the small farmhouse like a dance they had practiced, without knowing it. When she headed for the door to fetch her few belongings from the loft, he caught her hand and pulled her back for one more kiss, just because he could now, and she smiled against his mouth like she had been hoping he would. The night air was cool when they stepped outside, crisp with the promise of winter still months away. Stars scattered across the sky in their thousands, and the moon hung fat and silver over the fields. Brenna paused on the porch, looking out over the land they would now share in truth, not just on paper. "It is beautiful," she said softly. "I always thought so, but I never let myself believe it could be mine. It is yours, all of it. Every muddy field and stubborn fence post and chicken that refuses to cooperate." He stood beside her, shoulder to shoulder, and felt the rightness of it settle into his bones. "We built this together. That makes it ours." She leaned her head against his shoulder, a gesture of trust that still surprised him every time. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me, for choosing me, for making me feel like I belong somewhere. You do belong, here with me, and I am the one who should be grateful." He wrapped an arm around her waist, held her close, and made a silent promise to himself that he would spend every day proving she had made the right choice. "Now come on. Let us get your things before I change my mind and decide you should sleep in the chicken coop instead." She elbowed him lightly in the ribs, which only made him grin, and they walked together across the farmyard to the barn, their hands linked, their futures suddenly wide open and bright with possibility. The weeks between that night and the harvest festival passed in a blur of work and preparation. The wheat needed threshing, the apples needed picking, and the entire farm required the kind of intensive labor that left them both exhausted by nightfall. But it was a good exhaustion, the kind that came from building something worthwhile, and they fell into bed each night with aching muscles and satisfied smiles. Brenna moved into the main house the next morning, carrying her few possessions in a canvas sack that seemed tragically small for a year's worth of living. Nathaniel helped her settle into the bedroom that had been his and Sarah's, which felt strange for about 5 minutes before Brenna started reorganizing the storage chest, and it suddenly just felt right. She had her own way of doing things, methodical and efficient, and he was learning not to argue when she decided something needed changing. "The dresser should go under the window," she announced on the second day, hands on her hips as she surveyed the room. "Better light for getting dressed in the morning. Sarah always kept it by the door. I am not Sarah." She said it gently, without heat, just a simple statement of fact. Nathaniel looked at the dresser, then at her, and nodded. "No, you are not, and the window is better. Let me help you move it." They shifted furniture and rearranged the space until it felt like theirs, not his, and when they finally stood back to admire their work, Brenna slipped her hand into his and squeezed once. "This is strange," she said. "Good strange, but strange. I know what you mean." They told old Henderson first, mostly because his farm bordered theirs and he would find out soon enough anyway. The conversation went about as well as Nathaniel expected, which was to say poorly. Henderson stood in his doorway, face growing progressively redder as Nathaniel explained, and when he finally spoke, his voice shook with anger. "You have lost your mind, boy. That is the only explanation. Lost your damned fool mind. I am marrying her, Henderson. I came to tell you as a courtesy, not to ask permission." "A courtesy? You are spitting on your wife's grave is what you are doing. Sarah was a good Christian woman, and you want to replace her with some kind of a monster." Nathaniel felt his own temper rise, hot and sharp. "Be very careful what you say next. I will say what I please on my own property. You want to ruin yourself, fine, but do not expect the rest of us to smile and nod while you do it. That creature is not one of us, never will be. Then I suppose you will not be attending the wedding." Henderson spat into the dirt at Nathaniel's feet. "I would sooner burn my own barn down. And when this blows up in your face, when she shows her true colors and takes everything you own, do not come crying to me. You will have made your bed. You can lie in it." Nathaniel turned on his heel and walked away before he did something he would regret. His hands were shaking by the time he reached the road, anger and frustration, and a sick sense of disappointment churning in his gut. He had known Henderson was set in his ways, prejudiced and stubborn, but hearing the venom in the old man's voice was something else entirely. Brenna was waiting by the fence when he got home, her face carefully neutral. "I take it that went well. He is a fool. He is afraid. People lash out when they are afraid." She climbed down from the fence and fell into step beside him. "I told you this would happen. That does not make it right. No, but it makes it predictable." She was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Do you regret it, telling him?" "I regret that he is too blind to see what a remarkable woman you are, but I do not regret us, if that is what you are asking." She nodded slowly, and some of the tension went out of her shoulders. "Good, because I do not regret us either. Even when your neighbors decide we are the scandal of the century." The rest of their announcements went marginally better. The Carters, who ran the mill down by the river, were cautiously supportive, though Mrs. Carter spent 20 minutes lecturing them about the importance of finding a sympathetic priest. Young Thomas Fletcher, who helped out on the neighboring farms during harvest season, just grinned and said it was about time Nathaniel found someone to keep him in line. And the widow Morrison, who had been Sarah's closest friend, came by the farm herself and sat Brenna down for a long conversation that ended with both women in tears and a fierce hug that made Nathaniel's chest tight with gratitude. "Sarah would have wanted you happy, Mrs. Morrison said as she was leaving, one weathered hand on Nathaniel's arm. "And I think she would have liked this one. She has got a good head on her shoulders and a kind heart. That is what matters." "Thank you," Nathaniel said, and meant it more than he could express. The harvest festival arrived on a brilliant autumn afternoon, the sky so blue it hurt to look at, and the air crisp with the scent of apples and wood smoke. The valley had gathered in the common field at the center of the settlement, families bringing food and drink and music, children running wild through the stubbled wheat, while their parents traded gossip and news. Nathaniel and Brenna arrived together, hand in hand, and the conversations died away in ripples as people turned to stare. "Steady," Nathaniel murmured. "We knew this would happen." Brenna lifted her chin, spine straight, and gave him a smile that was all nerves and determination. "I know. But knowing and experiencing are two different things." They made their way through the crowd, greeting the people who would meet their eyes and ignoring the ones who turned away. Father Donnelly, the circuit priest who traveled between the valley settlements, stood near the festival bonfire, and he watched their approach with an expression that gave nothing away. "Father," Nathaniel said, "we were hoping you might have a moment." "I had heard rumors," Father Donnelly replied. He was an older man, grizzled and weathered from years of hard travel, and his eyes were sharp as he looked between them. "You want me to marry you, if you are willing. If not, we will find another way." The priest studied them for a long moment, and Nathaniel forced himself not to squirm under that assessing gaze. Finally, Father Donnelly sighed and rubbed a hand over his face. "The church has opinions on intermarriage, strong opinions. I know. And you are asking me to put my reputation on the line, possibly my position. I am asking you to do what is right, not what is easy." Nathaniel gestured to Brenna, who stood silent and tense beside him. "This woman has been my partner in every way that matters for a year. She is good and kind and works harder than anyone I have ever known. If the church cannot see fit to bless a union built on respect and love, then perhaps the church needs to examine its own heart." Father Donnelly's eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. "That is a dangerous thing to say to a priest, son. I know. But I am tired of pretending that following the rules matters more than doing what is right." For a long, tense moment, the priest said nothing. Then, slowly, a smile creased his weathered face. "Your Sarah argued with me like that once." Told me I was being a pompous fool about something or other, and she was absolutely right. I liked her, and I suspect she would approve of this match. Rules be damned." He clapped Nathaniel on the shoulder, then turned to Brenna. "What about you, child? You understand what you are agreeing to?" "The difficulties you will face, I understand," Brenna said quietly, "and I choose it anyway. I choose him." "Then who am I to stand in your way?" Father Donnelly gestured toward the bonfire, where the crowd had begun to gather, curious and uncertain. "We will do this properly. Out in the open for everyone to see. If we are going to scandalize the valley, we might as well do it thoroughly." Nathaniel felt a wild urge to laugh, relief and nerves and something like joy all tangled together. "Thank you, Father. Do not thank me yet. You still have to get through the ceremony without anyone rioting." As it turned out, there was no riot. There were whispers, certainly, and more than a few disapproving looks, but when Father Donnelly called the assembly to order and announced that there would be a wedding, most people stayed to watch. Some out of genuine curiosity, some probably hoping for drama, but they stayed. Nathaniel and Brenna stood before the priest with the bonfire at their backs and the valley stretched out before them. And when Father Donnelly began the familiar words of the marriage rite, everything else fell away. There was only Brenna's hand in his, warm and solid, and her eyes on his face, bright with unshed tears. "Do you, Nathaniel Ashford, take this woman as your wife, to have and to hold from this day forward in prosperity and hardship, in joy and sorrow, until death parts you?" "I do," Nathaniel said, and his voice rang clear across the field. "And do you, Brenna Whitlock, take this man as your husband, to have and to hold from this day forward in prosperity and hardship, in joy and sorrow, until death parts you?" Brenna's voice shook just slightly when she answered, but the words were firm. "I do." "Then, by the authority vested in me and in the sight of this community, I pronounce you husband and wife. What has been joined here, let no one tear asunder." Father Donnelly smiled, warm and genuine. "You may kiss your bride, son." Nathaniel leaned in, cupped Brenna's face in his hands, and kissed her while the valley watched. It was not their first kiss, not by a long shot, but it felt different knowing that it made everything official, binding them together in the eyes of the law and the church, and anyone who cared to witness. When they broke apart, Brenna was smiling through her tears, and Nathaniel felt like his heart might burst from the sheer weight of his happiness. The crowd's reaction was mixed. Some people cheered, genuine and warm. Others clapped politely, uncertain but willing to extend basic courtesy. And a few turned away, disgust or anger plain on their faces, and Nathaniel let them go. You could not change everyone's mind. You could only live your life as best you could and hope that example spoke louder than prejudice. The Carters brought forward a cake, and Mrs. Morrison produced a jug of honey wine that had been aging in her cellar for years, and the celebration became a proper festival. Music started up, fiddles and drums and voices raised in song, and Nathaniel pulled Brenna into a dance that was more enthusiasm than skill. She laughed as they spun through the stubbled wheat, her skirts flying, and for the first time since he had known her, she looked entirely free. They stayed until the bonfire burned down to coals and the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. Thomas Fletcher got cheerfully drunk and made a rambling toast about the importance of following your heart, which earned him a round of applause and a scolding from his mother. The widow Morrison cornered Brenna for another long conversation that ended with more hugging, and a package pressed into Brenna's hands that turned out to be Sarah's wedding quilt, carefully preserved and smelling faintly of lavender. "She would want you to have it, Mrs. Morrison said firmly when Brenna tried to protest. "You are family now. It belongs with family." By the time they finally walked home, Hand in hand under the moon, Nathaniel was exhausted and happy and more at peace than he had been in years. The farmhouse waited for them, small and sturdy in theirs, and when they stepped inside and closed the door, Brenna turned to him with a smile that made his breath catch. "So," she said, "we are married. We are. That makes this real, permanent. No more contracts to renew or terms to renegotiate. Just us," Nathaniel agreed, "for as long as we both shall live." She set the quilt down carefully on the table, then came to him and wrapped her arms around his waist, resting her head against his chest. "I keep waiting for something to go wrong, for someone to show up and say there was a mistake, that this is not allowed, that I have to leave. But it is real, is it not? We truly did this. We truly did." He held her close, one hand stroking her hair, and felt her slowly relax into him. "You are mine, and I am yours, and anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with Father Donnelly." She laughed softly against his shirt, then tipped her head back to look at him. "Take me to bed, husband. That is the best idea you have had all day, wife." They stumbled to the bedroom together, nervous and excited and fumbling with laces and buttons. And if it was awkward at times, it was also tender and real and entirely theirs. Afterward, they lay tangled together under Sarah's wedding quilt, skin against skin, and Nathaniel thought about the strange paths that brought people together and the courage it took to choose happiness. "I love you," Brenna whispered into the darkness. "I know I have said it before, but I want to keep saying it. I love you, Nathaniel Ashford." "I love you too, Brenna Ashford." He pressed a kiss to her forehead, her cheek, the corner of her mouth. "Now and always." She made a small, contented sound and burrowed closer, and within minutes, her breathing had evened out into sleep. Nathaniel lay awake a while longer, listening to the familiar sounds of the farm settling for the night, and let himself feel grateful for all of it. The work they had done together. The home they had built. The future stretching out before them, uncertain but bright. Eventually he slept too, and dreamed of spring planting and summer harvests and all the quiet, ordinary miracles that made a life. Winter came early that year, snow falling in thick white curtains that blanketed the valley and turned the farm into something from a children's story. Nathaniel and Brenna settled into the rhythms of married life, with the same practical efficiency they brought to everything else. She took over the cooking, which was a relief because Nathaniel's skills began and ended with porridge and burnt toast. He handled the livestock, because the animals had never quite warmed to Brenna despite her best efforts. Together they mended harnesses, repaired tools, and spent long evenings by the fire planning the spring planting. "We should expand the barley field," Brenna said one night, her head in his lap while he carded his fingers through her dark hair. "The north field did so well this year, and the price is good right now. More barley means less wheat. Are you sure that is wise? Barley is easier on the soil. We can rotate it properly, keep the land healthy for the long term." She shifted to look up at him, her green eyes serious. "I want this farm to last, Nathaniel, for us and for whoever comes after. That means thinking ahead." "Whoever comes after," he repeated softly. They had not talked much about children, both dancing around the subject because neither of them knew if it was even possible. "Do you think we could?" "Have children, I mean." Brenna was quiet for a long moment. "I do not know. No one ever told me it was possible, but no one ever told me it was impossible either. Most orc women do not marry human men, so there is not exactly a wealth of knowledge to draw from. Would you want them? Children?" "Yes." The word came out fierce, certain. "I want a family with you. Sons or daughters or both, little ones who grow up knowing they are loved and wanted. I want to give them everything I never had." She paused, then added more quietly, "But I will not be disappointed if it does not happen." You are enough, Nathaniel. Just you. You are enough for me too, he said and meant it. But I hope we have children. I hope we have a whole houseful and they all have your practical mind and your strength, and they drive us both completely mad with their antics. She laughed, and the sound of it filled the small farmhouse with warmth. Careful what you wish for. As winter gave way to spring, they threw themselves into the work of the farm with renewed energy. The barley field got planted as Brenna had wanted, rows of pale green shoots pushing up through the dark earth. The apple trees bloomed in clouds of white and pink, promising a good harvest come autumn. And in the barn, the cow they had bred in the fall gave birth to a healthy calf that Brenna immediately named Clover and fussed over like it was her own child. You know we will have to sell that calf eventually, Nathaniel pointed out, watching her scratch behind the little creature's ears. I know, but until then she is ours and she deserves a name and some affection. He did not argue, just leaned against the stall door and watched his wife gentle a newborn calf and thought about how lucky he was. Summer brought long days of work, sunrise to sunset and sometimes beyond. They hired Thomas Fletcher for the heaviest labor, and the young man proved worth every penny they paid him, strong and cheerful and utterly unfazed by Brenna's orcish appearance. He and Brenna developed an easy friendship, trading jokes and insults while they worked, and Nathaniel was grateful for it. She needed friends, people who saw her as more than just the strange orc woman who had somehow convinced a human farmer to marry her. It was Thomas who first noticed that Brenna had started moving more carefully, one hand occasionally resting on her stomach in a gesture that seemed almost unconscious. He caught Nathaniel's eye one afternoon while they were loading hay and jerked his chin toward where Brenna was organizing tools in the barn. You going to tell me, or do I have to ask? Thomas said, keeping his voice low. Tell you what, about the baby. Brenna is pregnant, is she not? Nathaniel felt his heart skip. We do not know yet, we have been hoping, but trust me. My mother had 6 of us, I know that look. Thomas grinned, wide and genuine. Congratulations, you lucky bastard. When is she due? Thomas, we really do not. Late winter, I am guessing. Maybe early spring. Thomas clapped him on the shoulder, nearly knocking him over. This is wonderful news. The valley's first half-orc baby. People are going to lose their minds. That is what I am afraid of. But Thomas just shook his head, still grinning. Let them talk. You are building something good here. A real family. That is worth more than all the gossip in the world. That evening, after Thomas had gone home and the farm had settled into quiet, Nathaniel found Brenna sitting on the porch steps, watching the sunset paint the fields gold and amber. He sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched, and waited. Thomas asked me if I was pregnant today, Brenna said eventually, while you were with the horses. He asked me the same thing. What did you tell him? That I thought I might be. That it is too early to be certain, but my body feels different, changed. She glanced at him, cautious and hopeful all at once. I did not want to say anything until I was sure, in case I was wrong. Nathaniel took her hand, laced their fingers together. And if you are right, then we are going to have a child together. A son or a daughter who is part you and part me, and who will probably be the most stubborn creature ever born. She squeezed his hand. Are you happy? Truly? Happy does not even begin to cover it. He pulled her close, wrapped an arm around her shoulders, and felt her relax into him. A baby. Our baby. God, Brenna. Yes, I am happy. They sat there until the stars came out, talking in low voices about names and nurseries and all the things they would need to prepare. It felt surreal, discussing bottles and cradles, and whether to put the baby in the second bedroom or set up a cradle beside their own bed. But it also felt right, like the next natural step in a journey they had started the day She walked onto his farm with 2 silver coins and a desperate hope for something better. The pregnancy was confirmed a few weeks later by the widow Morrison, who had midwifed half the valley and knew what she was looking at. She examined Brenna with gentle efficiency, asked a dozen questions, and finally pronounced that yes, there was definitely a baby on the way, due sometime in late winter. "You will need to be careful," Mrs. Morrison said, her tone brooking no argument. "No heavy lifting in the last few months. Plenty of rest, good food, and you come to me the moment anything feels wrong. Do you understand?" "I understand," Brenna said meekly, and Nathaniel hid a smile because he had never heard her sound meek before. As Brenna's pregnancy progressed, the valley's reaction was predictably mixed. Some people were genuinely pleased, stopping by to offer congratulations and hand-me-down baby clothes. Others treated it like a scandal, whispering behind their hands about the abomination that would surely result from mixing human and orc blood. Old Henderson made a point of crossing to the other side of the road whenever he saw them in town, his disapproval written plain across his face. Nathaniel did his best to ignore it, to focus on Brenna and the farm, and the future they were building. But it wore on him, the constant judgment, the sense that they were being watched and found wanting. One particularly bad day, after a trip to the market where 3 different people had made pointed comments, he came home in a foul mood and nearly bit Brenna's head off when she asked how it had gone. "Fine," he snapped. "Everything is fine." She looked at him for a long moment, then set down the shirt she had been mending. "No, it is not. What happened? Nothing, just people being people." He paced the length of the kitchen, too restless to sit. "I am tired of it, Brenna. Tired of the looks and the whispers and the constant feeling that we have to justify our existence to everyone we meet." "I know." "Do you? Because sometimes I think you just accept it, like it is the price we have to pay, and I do not want to accept it. I want people to see what I see when I look at you. Someone strong and kind and good, who deserves respect and dignity and basic human decency." Brenna stood and crossed to him, caught his hands before he could pull away. "I do accept it. Not because I think it is right, but because I learned a long time ago that you cannot control what other people think or feel. You can only control how you respond." She waited until he met her eyes. "I appreciate that you want to fight for me. I love that you want to defend me. But I do not need defending, Nathaniel. I just need you beside me. That is enough." He let out a long breath, felt some of the tension drain out of his shoulders. "I hate that you have to deal with this, that our child will have to deal with this. Our child will have 2 parents who love each other and love them. That is more than many children get, human or orc or anything in between." She placed one of his hands on her stomach, which had started to curve outward with the growing baby. "Feel that? That is our future. That is what matters." Under his palm he felt a tiny flutter, barely there, like butterfly wings against his skin. His breath caught, and he looked at Brenna with wonder written plain across his face. Was that the baby? Kicking? Her smile was radiant, transforming her face into something luminous. "That is the first time I have felt it strong enough to share." Nathaniel dropped to his knees, pressed his forehead against her stomach, and felt tears prick hot behind his eyes. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "We are so excited to meet you. Please be patient with your mother and me. We are going to make a lot of mistakes, but we will love you so much that hopefully it balances out." Brenna's hand came down to rest on his head, her fingers threading through his hair. "We are going to be all right," she said quietly. "All of us, I promise." And kneeling there on the kitchen floor with his wife's hand in his hair and his child moving under his palm, Nathaniel chose to believe her. Autumn arrived again, the second since they had met, and the farm exploded into color and activity. The harvest was even better than the year before. the barley field yielding exactly as Brenna had predicted, and the apple trees so heavy with fruit that they had to recruit extra help just to bring it all in. Thomas Fletcher worked alongside them through the long days, and Father Donnelly stopped by one afternoon to help press cider and share news from his travels. "You two have become quite the topic of conversation," the priest said, wiping juice from his hands. "All the way down to the coastal settlements, people are talking about the human farmer and his orc wife. Some of it is ugly, I will not lie, but some of it is curious, interested. You are making people think about things they would rather ignore, and that is valuable." "We are not trying to make a statement," Nathaniel said. "We are just trying to live our lives. The best statements are the ones you do not have to try for." Father Donnelly smiled. "How is Brenna feeling, the baby?" "She is enormous and uncomfortable and counting the days until this is over. But both she and the baby seem healthy, according to Mrs. Morrison." "Good. That woman knows her business." The priest paused, then added more quietly, "You should prepare yourself, son. There will be people who refuse to accept this child, who will treat them badly simply because of what they are. You cannot protect them from all of it. I can try." "Yes, you can try, and you should. But you should also teach them to be strong, to value themselves even when others do not. They will need that strength." Nathaniel nodded slowly, the weight of it settling on his shoulders. Parenthood had seemed abstract before, something distant and theoretical. But now, with the baby due in a matter of months, it felt terrifyingly real. He and Brenna would be responsible for a whole new person, someone who would rely on them for everything, and the thought was both exhilarating and utterly terrifying. The first snow fell in early December, light flakes that melted on contact but promised more to come. Brenna had slowed down considerably by then, her movements careful and deliberate, one hand almost always resting on her swollen belly. Nathaniel took over most of her chores without comment, and she let him, which told him how tired she really was. "I feel like a cow," she complained one evening, sprawled awkwardly on the couch because sitting upright had become uncomfortable. "A very large, very useless cow." "You are not useless. You are growing a whole human being. That seems fairly useful to me. Half human, half orc. And I am fairly certain this child is going to be born already arguing, based on how much they kick." Nathaniel grinned and knelt beside the couch, resting his hand on her stomach. Sure enough, a series of solid thumps greeted his palm, as if the baby was saying hello. Vigorous. "That is a good sign. Easy for you to say. You are not the one getting kicked in the bladder every 20 minutes. True. But I am the one who has to sleep next to you while you snore like a congested bear, so I think we are even." She swatted at him half-heartedly, which only made him laugh. This was good, he thought. This playfulness, this easy affection. It balanced out the harder moments, the times when fear or uncertainty threatened to overwhelm them both. Mrs. Morrison came by more frequently as the due date approached, checking on Brenna's progress and making sure they had everything they needed. She brought diapers and soft blankets and a bassinet that had been in her family for 3 generations, and she taught Nathaniel how to swaddle a squirming infant using a sack of grain as a stand-in. "You are going to do fine," she assured him after he fumbled the wrapping for the 5th time. "Nobody knows what they are doing the first time. You just figure it out as you go. That is not as comforting as you seem to think it is." She laughed and patted his cheek. "You will be fine. You have Brenna and she has you, and that baby will be lucky to have both of you as parents." The baby came on a frigid night in late January, 3 weeks earlier than Mrs. Morrison had predicted, and in the middle of a howling snowstorm that made fetching the midwife an adventure. Nathaniel rode through the blizzard like a madman, his horse struggling through drifts that came up to its knees, and when he finally pounded on Mrs. Morrison's door, she took one look at his face and grabbed her bag without a word. "How far apart are the pains?" she asked as they rode back, her voice barely audible over the wind. 5 minutes, maybe less. She told me to go, said there was still time, but she looked scared, and Brenna never looks scared. First babies can be unpredictable. We will get there in time, or we will not, and either way the baby will come when it is ready. She must have seen something in his face because her expression softened. "Breathe, Nathaniel. Women have been having babies since the dawn of time. Brenna is strong. She will be fine." He wanted to believe her. He did believe her, mostly. But the ride back to the farm seemed to take forever, every minute an agony of worry and fear. When they finally burst through the door, snow swirling in behind them, Brenna was on the bed, breathing hard through a contraction, her face sheened with sweat. "About time," she gasped when she saw them. "I thought I was going to have to do this alone." "Not a chance," Nathaniel said, rushing to her side. "I am right here, not going anywhere." Mrs. Morrison took over with the calm efficiency of long experience, examining Brenna, timing contractions, issuing orders that Nathaniel scrambled to follow. "Heat water. Find clean towels. Hold Brenna's hand and do not let go no matter how hard she squeezes." The labor lasted 6 hours, which Mrs. Morrison said was quite fast for a first baby, but which felt like an eternity to Nathaniel. He held Brenna's hand, wiped her face with cool cloths, murmured encouragement when she was too exhausted to push any more. She bore it with the same determination she brought to everything else, gritting her teeth through the pain and refusing to give up even when it seemed like it would never end. And then, just as dawn was breaking gray and cold through the windows, a thin, angry wail split the air, and Mrs. Morrison held up a squirming, red-faced infant that was the most beautiful thing Nathaniel had ever seen. "A boy," the midwife announced, quickly wrapping him in a blanket and placing him on Brenna's chest. "And he has got excellent lungs. Congratulations." Brenna stared down at the baby with tears streaming down her face, her hands coming up to cradle him with infinite gentleness. "Hello," she whispered. "Hello, little one. We have been waiting for you." Nathaniel leaned in close, his arm around Brenna's shoulders, and looked at his son for the first time. The baby had green-tinged skin, lighter than Brenna's but unmistakably orcish, and tiny pointed ears that lay flat against his head. His eyes were scrunched shut, and he was making small, snuffling sounds as he rooted against Brenna's chest. "He is perfect," Nathaniel said, his voice breaking. "Absolutely perfect. He looks like you," Brenna said, smiling through her tears. "Look at his nose. That is your nose. Poor kid. He deserved better." She laughed, exhausted and deliriously happy, and pressed a kiss to the baby's forehead. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names endlessly over the past few months, compiling lists and debating merits, but nothing had felt quite right. Now, looking at his son's scrunched-up little face, one name rose to the surface with absolute certainty. "Corwin," Nathaniel said. "If that suits you. Corwin Ashford." Brenna tested the name silently, her lips forming the syllables, then nodded. "Corwin. Yes, I like it. It is strong, solid." She looked down at the baby, who had finally latched on and was nursing with single-minded determination. "Hello, Corwin. Welcome to your family, Mrs." Morrison bustled around the room, cleaning up and checking on Brenna with practiced efficiency. When she was satisfied that both mother and baby were stable, she pulled Nathaniel aside and handed him a cup of strong tea that he did not remember asking for. "They are going to be fine," she said firmly. "Brenna did beautifully and the baby is healthy, but she needs rest now and lots of it. You are going to have to take over everything for the next few weeks. Can you do that?" "Yes, of course. Whatever she needs." "Good." The widow Morrison squeezed his arm, her expression fond. "You are a good man, Nathaniel Ashford. Your son is lucky to have you." After she left, Nathaniel climbed carefully into bed beside Brenna, who had fallen into an exhausted doze with Corwin still cradled against her chest. He wrapped his arm around them both, holding his family close, and felt a fierce swell of protective love that threatened to overwhelm him. This was what mattered. Not the whispers or the judgment or the people who could not see past their prejudices. Just this. His wife and his son, safe and warm and his. "Thank you," he whispered to Brenna, not sure if she could hear him. "Thank you for choosing me, for building this life with me, for giving me him." She stirred slightly, her eyes cracking open. "Thank you for seeing me," she murmured. "For loving me when no one else would. I will always love you, both of you, no matter what. I know." She smiled, soft and content, and closed her eyes again. "We know." Nathaniel lay awake a while longer, watching his wife and son sleep, and thought about the contract they had signed 2 years ago. Half share of the farm. Equal say. Business arrangement only. They had torn that contract up and replaced it with something so much better. Something permanent and real, and built on trust and love and the willingness to choose each other every single day. The farm would need tending in the morning. The animals would need feeding, the paths would need shoveling, and all the ordinary work of life would reassert itself. But for now, in this quiet moment before dawn, Nathaniel let himself simply be. A husband, a father, a man who had been given far more than he deserved and who would spend the rest of his life being grateful for it. Outside, the snow had stopped falling, and the world lay clean and white and full of possibility. Inside, a baby stirred and made small, sleepy sounds, and Nathaniel pressed a kiss to his son's downy head and promised him a future full of love and laughter and all the best things life had to offer. Spring arrived eventually, as it always did, and with it came the busy season of planting and preparation. Corwin grew from a tiny, squalling infant into a plump, curious baby who smiled at everyone and everything, and seemed to find the world endlessly fascinating. He had his mother's green skin and pointed ears, but his father's brown eyes and quick smile, and the combination was somehow perfect. Thomas Fletcher stopped by regularly to help with the heavy work, and he proved surprisingly adept with babies, coaxing smiles from Corwin and entertaining him with silly faces while Nathaniel and Brenna worked. Father Donnelly visited to bless the child, and even old Henderson grudgingly admitted that the baby seemed healthy enough, though he still refused to set foot on the property. The valley adjusted slowly to the reality of the Ashford family. Some people remained hostile, their prejudices too deeply rooted to change, but others softened, won over by the simple fact of Corwin's existence. He was a baby, after all, innocent and helpless and impossible not to love. And if loving the baby meant accepting his parents, well, that was a price some people were willing to pay. One warm afternoon in late spring, Nathaniel and Brenna sat on the porch together, watching Corwin crawl determinedly after a butterfly that had landed in the grass. He was nearly 6 months old now, strong and healthy and fearless, and he approached the world with the same single-minded determination his mother brought to everything. "You remember that first contract?" Brenna asked, her head resting on Nathaniel's shoulder. "The one where we divided everything so carefully and promised it was just business. I remember thinking I was very clever for coming up with such a practical solution to my labor shortage. And I remember thinking you were either desperate or insane, possibly both." Nathaniel laughed. "Probably both, if I am honest, but it worked out, did it not? Better than worked out." She lifted her head to look at him, her eyes warm and soft in the afternoon light. "You gave me a home, Nathaniel, a family, a future I never thought I could have. I did not know how to thank you for that then, and I still do not know now. You do not need to thank me. You gave me all the same things. We built this together, remember? Equal partners. Equal partners, she repeated, smiling. I like the sound of that. Corwin let out a squeal of delight as the butterfly landed on his outstretched hand, then flew away, leaving him staring after it in wonder. Brenna laughed and stood, scooping him up and spinning him around until he shrieked with laughter. Come on, little one, she said, settling him on her hip. Let us go find your father something to eat. He gets grumpy when he is hungry. I do not get grumpy, Nathaniel protested, following them inside. You absolutely get grumpy and snippy, and you make that face like you have been sucking on lemons. I do not make a face. Brenna just smiled, that knowing smile that meant she was right and they both knew it, and Nathaniel could not help but grin back. This was his life now. Good-natured bickering and baby laughter and a wife who knew him well enough to call him on his nonsense. It was everything he had never known he wanted, and he would not trade it for anything in the world. That evening, after Corwin had been fed and bathed and put down for the night, Nathaniel and Brenna sat together on the porch again, watching the stars come out one by one. The farm lay quiet around them, fields planted and animals settled, everything in its place. I have been thinking, Brenna said quietly, about the future, about what comes next. And what did you decide? That I want more of this. More years with you, maybe more children if we are blessed. More seasons of planting and harvest, more evenings like this one. She took his hand, threaded her fingers through his. I want to grow old here on this farm with you beside me. I want to watch Corwin grow up and have children of his own, and I want to be the slightly terrifying grandmother who gives them too many sweets and teaches them to be strong. Nathaniel felt his throat tighten with emotion. That sounds perfect to me. Good. Because you do not get a choice in the matter. That kiss we shared back when we decided to get married, that made it permanent, remember? You are stuck with me now. Best decision I ever made. She leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence. Two people who had started as strangers and become partners, and then something far deeper and more precious. The road ahead would not always be easy. There would be hard seasons and difficult years, judgment from people who could not see past their fears, challenges they could not yet imagine. But they would face all of it together, side by side, the way they had faced everything else. And that, Nathaniel thought, was more than enough. It was everything. Years passed in the way that years do when you are busy living them, marked by harvests and birthdays and all the small milestones that make up a life. Corwin grew into a bright, curious boy who loved the farm with the same passion his parents did. He learned to plant seeds and milk cows and mend fences, and he never once questioned that his family was different from others. To him, having a human father and an orc mother was simply normal, the way things had always been. The valley changed too, slowly but surely. More people accepted the Ashfords, won over by time and familiarity, and the simple fact that the family posed no threat to anyone. A few other mixed couples formed, encouraged by the example Nathaniel and Brenna had set, and each one made it a little easier for the next. The world was changing, one small choice at a time, and while prejudice did not disappear, it lost some of its power. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Nathaniel and Brenna stood in the same field where they had been married, hand in hand under the autumn sky. Corwin ran through the stubbled wheat with Thomas Fletcher's daughter, their laughter ringing clear across the valley, and Father Donnelly stood nearby with a cup of cider and a satisfied smile. You have done well, the priest said, raising his cup in salute. Both of you. You have built something worth building. We tried, Nathaniel said simply. You succeeded, and that matters more than you know. Father Donnelly glanced at the children, then back at the couple. The world is better because you chose each other. Never forget that. Later, after the guests had gone home and Corwin had been tucked into bed, Nathaniel and Brenna sat together on their porch in the spot that had become theirs over the years. The moon was full and bright, casting silver light over the fields they had worked and tended and loved. 5 years, Brenna said softly. It feels like forever and no time at all. I know what you mean. Nathaniel pulled her close, breathed in the familiar scent of her, soap and earth and home. Thank you for saying yes. For taking a chance on the strange human farmer who showed up with a half-baked contract and too much hope. Thank you for seeing past what I was supposed to be and loving who I actually am. She turned in his arms, cupped his face in her hands. I would do it all again, Nathaniel. Every moment. Every choice. It all led me here to you, and I would not change a single thing. He kissed her then, soft and slow and full of promise, and tasted 5 years of partnership and love and the building of something real. When they finally broke apart, both smiling, Brenna rested her forehead against his. So, she said, same time next year. And every year after that, Nathaniel agreed. Until the stars burn out and the world ends. You are stuck with me, remember, that kiss made it permanent. Best mistake I ever made. They laughed together, and somewhere in the house, Corwin called out in his sleep, a soft sound that might have been a dream. Nathaniel thought about going to check on him, but Brenna shook her head. He is fine. Let him sleep. Let us just stay here a moment longer. So they did. 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built a life worth living, watching the stars wheel overhead and listening to the quiet sounds of the farm they loved. The future stretched out before them, unknown but no longer frightening, because they would face it together. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Not the contracts or the terms or the careful negotiations that had brought them together. Just love and trust and the choice to keep choosing each other, day after day, year after year, for as long as they both should live. The arrangement had become permanent, sealed with a kiss and strengthened by time, and Nathaniel Ashford knew with absolute certainty that he was the luckiest man alive.